Welcome everyone to another deep dive. I'm actually incredibly curious to get into our material today because we are looking at a topic that is guaranteed to get your mental gears turning.
Oh, absolutely.
We are exploring the mind, the drives, the absolute sheer audacity and the fascinating contradictions of one of the most polarizing figures of our modern era. We're talking about Elon Musk.
It is a phenomenal subject to tackle because regardless of where you stand on him personally or politically, the sheer scale of his impact on multiple completely disparate industries is just undeniable.
Right.
We are talking about fundamentally altering the trajectory of aerospace, automotive manufacturing, and even digital finance. But the mechanics of how that was achieved are often, they're buried under the mythology.
Exactly. And to cut through that mythology, we are drawing from an incredibly detailed set of materials today. We're looking at an in-depth transcript from a documentary titled Elon Musk, Visionary of Tomorrow.
Which is a great source.
It is. And our mission here today, for you, the listener, is to go way beyond the daily headlines. We're not here to just recite a chronological biography,
No, that would be boring.
Right. We want to extract the real why behind the monumental successes, the near disasters, of which there are a staggering amount, and the seemingly impossible goals. If you're someone who loves to learn, this is an absolute masterclass in risk tolerance, psychological resilience, and first principles thinking.
That's the perfect way to frame it. The material we're analyzing doesn't just list what he built. It really tries to deconstruct the psychological engine that powers someone to take the kind of world-altering risks he takes on a daily basis.
It really does.
It gives us a window into a mindset that operates on a completely different frequency.
Okay, let's unpack this by going right back to the beginning. Because you don't just wake up one Tuesday and decide you're going to colonize Mars.
You really don't.
We have to look at the crucible of the childhood, the early years. So Elon Reeve Musk was born in Pretoria, South Africa in 1971. His mother, May, is Canadian and was, and actually still is, a highly successful, glamorous model.
Yeah, she was called an it girl by Vanity Fair even at 69 years old, working for major global brands.
Wow. And his father was a South African electromechanical engineer.
And, the dynamic of that upbringing is crucial to understanding everything that comes later. The background we have details a childhood that was, in many ways, incredibly solitary.
Isolated.
Very. He was raised largely by books. He had occasional nannies, but there was a distinct lack of heavy adult supervision. We're talking about a kid who was literally building highly reactive chemical explosives.
Just in his backyard.
Exactly. And learning to drive on his own.
Which sounds absolutely terrifying for a parent, but clearly fostered a radical kind of independence.
It does, but we have to look deeper at the psychology of the serial entrepreneur here. There's a common, almost Hollywood misconception that serial entrepreneurs are just endlessly chasing money.
Right, like it's just about the score.
Exactly. That they build a company, sell it, and then build another one simply because they want a bigger bank account. But the psychological profile we're looking at suggests something entirely different.
What does it suggest?
It posits that extreme entrepreneurial drive, the kind of drive that literally never switches off, even when you're a billionaire, often stems from adverse childhood events.
But wait, if we look at the surface, he grew up in a relatively affluent household. His father was a successful engineer. It wasn't exactly a story of abject poverty. So where is this severe adversity coming from?
It comes from the emotional environment and a profound lack of control. After his parents divorced around age 9, he chose to go live with his father because he felt sorry for him being alone.
Which is a heavy burden for a 9-year-old.
It is. And it's a decision he later called a terrible mistake. The home life was described as a genuinely dark, psychologically grueling situation. But beyond the difficult home life, the physical reality of his day-to-day existence was brutal.
At school, right.
Yes. The bullying he faced at school was incredibly severe.
Yeah, at Bryanston High School in Pretoria. He was highly intellectual, deeply introverted, interested in things that made him stand out to his peers in a bad way, and he became a massive target.
A huge target.
The documentation describes an incident where he was thrown down a concrete stairwell and beaten so badly he was actually knocked unconscious and hospitalized.
And what's fascinating here is how that specific feeling, that absolute terrifying lack of physical and emotional control, can become the psychological engine for the rest of a person's life.
It flips a switch.
It does. The analysis points out that these adverse events motivate a person to prove something on a monumental scale. You want to gain control of a world that felt completely uncontrollable and dangerous when you were young.
So moving into a position of absolute power, becoming a CEO, launching massive companies,
It gives you the strength and the architectural control over reality that you were deprived of. And physically, he also took back control. He eventually had a growth spurt, took up wrestling and judo, and actually started physically fighting back against the bullies.
he channeled that trauma into dominance, not just physical, but intellectual. It's almost like he decided that if the physical world was going to be hostile, he would build a mental fortress that no one could penetrate.
Exactly.
Moving on to Boys High School from 1986 to 1988, his science teacher remembers him vividly. He wasn't the loud kid at the front of the class begging for the teacher's attention.
No, he sat at the back.
Right, quietly getting on with his work, entirely self-directed, and ended up with distinctions in both science and computer studies.
His grasp of technology was apparent very early on, and it served as that mental fortress. We're talking about a kid who started working with computers around age 10.
Which in the early 80s was rare.
Very rare. And by the time he was 10 to 12 years old, he had taught himself programming and developed a video game called Blastar.
And he actually sold it, didn't he?
He did. He sold the commercial software code to a PC magazine for $500.
$500 for a kid in the early 80s. That is a massive amount of money. And it wasn't just rudimentary coding. The material highlights this inherent, almost obvious understanding he had of the physical world.
Yeah, he recalled that while other kids were confused about how things work, to him it was immediately clear how wiring functioned, or how a light switch completed an electrical circuit.
It wasn't something they had to study.
No, it was just apparent.
He coupled this innate physical understanding with a chess-playing mindset. He was always thinking multiple steps ahead, mapping out how short-term moves could fit into a massive long-term plan.
He wasn't just looking at the immediate outcome of an action, he was looking at the second, third, and fourth order effects.
That chess analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
Most people play life like checkers, reacting to the move directly in front of them.
Oh.
He was playing hyper-dimensional chess from a very young age, seeing the board not just as it is, but as it will be 10 moves from now.
Exactly.
So for you listening right now, it's worth taking a second to think about your own early hurdles. How did the things that made you feel powerless or out of control shape your professional drives today?
It's a great question.
It's a very relatable entry point into a mind that can otherwise seem completely alien.
It absolutely grounds the narrative. It reminds us that before there were orbital rockets and global electric car infrastructures, there was just a kid trying to figure out how to navigate a world that wasn't particularly kind to him.
Yeah.
And he realized very quickly that his immediate environment couldn't support the scale of what he wanted to build.
Right. He realizes that South Africa, especially in the late 1980s, is not the chessboard he wants to be playing on
Not at all.
if he wants to achieve these massive ambitions. And he literally wrote a college paper outlining his desire to conquer the internet, space exploration, solar energy, artificial intelligence, and brain interfaces. He needs to be in the United States.
He's chasing the hub of global innovation, the American dream.
But he couldn't get to the U.S. directly.
No, he had to route his journey through Canada, leveraging his mother's citizenship. He attended Queen's University in Ontario for 2 years.
And it's really important to note the financial reality here.
Very important. He was funding himself. He was relying on scholarships and working brutal part-time jobs like cleaning out the boiler room of a lumber mill.
Wow.
This wasn't a silver spoon situation where he was handed a massive trust fund to go play startup in Silicon Valley.
Not at all. He eventually makes it to the U.S., gets dual degrees in economics and physics from the University of Pennsylvania, and then gets accepted into a PhD program in materials science at Stanford in 1995.
Stanford.
The absolute pinnacle of academia in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Most people would view that as the ultimate arrival. And what does he do?
He drops out.
After exactly 2 days.
2 days. But you have to contextualize 1995.
The internet. Boom.
Exactly. The Netscape IPO, the realization that the web was going to fundamentally rewire human commerce and communication, it was happening right outside his window.
He couldn't wait.
He looked at the academic timeline, which measures progress in years and peer-reviewed papers, and realized it was simply too slow for the speed at which his mind was operating.
So instead of studying material science, he starts a company with his brother, Kimball, called Zip2. Now, to modern ears, the product sounds simple.
It does.
It was essentially an online Yellow Pages, combined with vector graphics mapping designed for newspaper companies to bring their local directories onto the internet.
But in the mid-90s, getting a map to render on a web page and connect to a business database was cutting-edge software engineering.
They built it from the ground up.
Literally sleeping in the office and showering at the local YMCA because they couldn't afford an apartment.
Talked about skin in the game.
And the execution was flawless enough that when he's just 27 years old, Compaq Computers buys the company for roughly $307 million.
Unbelievable.
He personally walks away with $22 million.
Now pause there. $22 million at age 27. For 99.9% of the population, that is the definitive finish line. You buy a house in the hills, you invest the rest in safe index funds, and you enjoy a very comfortable, highly privileged life.
But this is where the serial entrepreneur psychology kicks in. It's almost described like a compulsion.
How so?
You have a successful vision, you prove that your internal model of reality works in the external world, and immediately you want to execute the next, infinitely larger vision.
The money isn't the goal.
The money is just fuel for the next project.
So in typical fashion, he takes roughly half of that money, around $10 to $12 million of his own personal cash, and rolls it into a brand new venture called X.com, which would eventually merge and become PayPal.
And we have to really dig into the context of what he was trying to do here. At this time, people were terrified to use their credit cards to buy a physical book on a static web page.
Let alone bank online.
Exactly. The idea of putting your entire financial life, full banking services on the early internet was considered completely revolutionary and highly dangerous.
It was pure audacity. He wasn't just trying to build a website. He was trying to disrupt the global financial market, which relied on archaic, slow systems like the ACH network, where clearing a check took days.
He wanted a real-time, peer-to-peer digital ledger.
In fact, in 1999, putting banking on the internet was voted one of the 10 worst business ideas by the financial establishment.
Of course it was.
But he ignores the establishment. He pioneered offering cash rewards, literally giving people $10 to sign up and $10 for every friend they referred.
And the growth was absolute chaos.
Complete chaos.
Because when you incentivize signups with free money, you don't just attract legitimate users, you attract organized crime.
Yes, the fraud problem. They went from a few thousand users to over 1 million in just months. The peer-to-peer payment side took off, then online eBay auctions grabbed hold of it, and they were adding tens of thousands of new accounts every single day.
Which sounds great until you look at the back end.
Right. Russian syndicates were creating automated scripts to siphon out the sign-up bonuses. They were bleeding cash.
And this is where the engineering mindset is forced to solve a financial problem. Traditional banks would have frozen accounts and required physical identity verification.
Which would have killed their growth.
Exactly. Musk and his team had to invent some of the first CAMT-CHAs and complex fraud algorithms to detect human behavior versus machine behavior just to keep the company from being drained dry.
And while they are fighting off international hackers, they are also dealing with a massive domestic infrastructure crisis. Which brings us to the famous Omaha pivot story.
I love this story.
It is so illustrative of his management and problem-solving style. They launch the service and immediately they have a customer service nightmare.
Because people don't understand the interface.
Right. People are panicking because they don't understand the digital interface, they don't know how to get their money out, and they are calling and emailing a dozen times each.
Yeah.
Suddenly, PayPal has 2 million emails queued up.
2 million.
And they only have 10 customer service employees in California.
And California real estate and labor are incredibly expensive.
You have a literal house on fire. The company is drowning in its own success. Traditional corporate logic would dictate a slow, measured response hiring. An expensive management consulting firm, finding commercial real estate, slowly onboarding staff over a 6-month period.
But instead, an employee goes to Musk and says, "This sounds crazy, but I have a big family in the Midwest. I could train them to do customer service from their living rooms."
At first, Musk laughs at the idea.
Naturally.
But a few hours later, she does the math, comes back and says, "All right, get on a plane."
Incredible.
This employee flies to Nebraska, trains 10 family members in their house. Then the sister hires 12 stay-at-home parents in a small town.
And it scales.
They were so fiercely effective that they went from 0 to 100 people in 6 weeks and eventually built a dedicated customer service center in Omaha, Nebraska that employed 1,800 people.
That anecdote perfectly encapsulates his operational philosophy. He doesn't care about conventional corporate methods. He doesn't care how things are supposed to be done.
He cares about solving the immediate critical failure with whatever works, immediately.
It also highlights how intensely hands-on he was. It was his money on the table, so he was involved in every granular detail, routinely working until midnight or 2 a.m., sending emails, and expecting everyone else to match his relentless pace.
But wait, if you're a standard employee, that pace is completely unsustainable. You can't expect everyone to care as much as the guy who has $12 million on the line.
No, you really can't.
And naturally, that friction reaches a boiling point. And here's where it gets really interesting. The tension culminates in a boardroom coup.
A literal coup.
Musk was co-CEO with Peter Thiel at the time, and there were deep disagreements over the company's technology infrastructure. Specifically, Musk wanted to migrate the servers to Windows NT, while others heavily favored Unix.
It sounds like a nerdy technical debate, but it was a battle for the soul and stability of the company's architecture. And the way the board handled it was brutally strategic.
They waited until Musk was on a plane,
Flying to South Africa for his honeymoon, of all things, to initiate a vote of no confidence and oust him as CEO.
The timing is incredible. There's an account from an ally of Musk who describes the absolute cinematic tension of that night. This ally had spoken to Musk earlier that day thinking things were relatively stable.
Right.
Then, sitting in bed at 10:30 p.m., all the pieces of office politics he'd seen over the past few weeks suddenly click together. He realizes a coup is happening right then.
Panic sets in.
He rushes back to the office, and sure enough, the board is on the phone voting Musk out. He desperately tries to call Musk, but he's in the air, unreachable.
Nowhere to be found.
By the morning when the plane lands, the deed is done.
Imagine the visceral betrayal. You sink your own fortune into a company, work grueling hours to save it from collapse, invent solutions to keep it alive, and you're ousted while you're literally in the sky, unable to defend yourself.
Most people would be consumed by an apocalyptic level of bitterness. They would launch massive lawsuits, wage a PR war, and try to burn the place down out of spite.
But Musk's reaction was remarkably, almost unnervingly pragmatic.
He stepped down as CEO, but remained on the board and kept his shares. He didn't let his ego destroy his equity.
And that ability to compartmentalize emotion from economics paid off astronomically. In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion.
$1.5 billion.
And because Musk had retained his shares as the largest shareholder, he walked away with roughly $165 million after taxes.
$165 million.
Yeah.
Let that number sink in. If the $22 million from Zip2 was the finish line, $165 million is generational dynastic wealth.
Exactly.
Normal people, upon receiving a check for $165 million, would buy a private island, retire to a beach in the south of France, and say, "I'm done. I won capitalism."
But we are not talking about a normal person. We are talking about someone driven by a very different set of metrics. Instead of buying an island, he takes nearly the entire fortune and rolls it into 3 massive, phenomenally high-risk ventures that target the fundamental survival and future of humanity.
SpaceX, Tesla, and SolarCity. Which brings us to the space frontier. He takes $100 million of his own money and starts Space Exploration Technologies, or SpaceX, in 2002.
$100 million.
Now, his overarching goal here isn't just to launch a few telecommunications satellites for profit. It's deeply existential.
It's about preserving humanity.
The goal is to make humanity a multiplanetary species and establish a self-sustaining city on Mars to back up the biosphere in case something catastrophic happens to Earth.
And again, the industry reaction was total, unadulterated dismissal.
They thought he was a joke.
Space was equated strictly with massive national governments, NASA, the European Space Agency, the Russian Federal Space Agency. The idea that a random internet software guy from Silicon Valley thought he could build orbital rockets was laughable. It was viewed as the ultimate billionaire vanity project.
Literally laughable, because before he decided to build his own, he actually flew to Russia to try and buy refurbished intercontinental ballistic missiles.
The Dnepr rockets.
Right. To use as launch vehicles. He thought he could just buy the hardware and modify it for a Mars mission. And the Russian aerospace engineers practically laughed him out of the room.
They treated him like a naive tourist.
They wanted outrageous prices, and one engineer literally spat on his shoes to show his disrespect.
But that rejection was the catalyst for his most important realization. Flying back to the U.S., completely frustrated, he applies first principles thinking.
Let's actually define that, because it's crucial. What does first principles thinking actually look like in this context?
First principles thinking is a physics-based approach to problem solving. Instead of reasoning by analogy, which is saying rockets cost this much because that's what rockets have always cost, you break the problem down to its fundamental physical truths.
You strip away the assumptions.
Yes. He asked himself, what is a rocket physically made of? It's aerospace-grade aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, and carbon fiber. Then he asked, what is the value of those materials on the commodity spot market?
And the math blew his mind. He realized the raw materials for a rocket were only about 2% of the price of a finished rocket.
The other 98% was bloated manufacturing processes, bureaucracy, and legacy aerospace contractors padding their margins.
So he decides, fine, if you won't sell me a rocket for a fair price, I'll just build my own from scratch, entirely in-house.
Which is a beautiful theory. But theory and reality are very different, and orbital mechanics is notoriously unforgiving. Engineering a controlled explosion that can punch through the atmosphere without vibrating itself to pieces is incredibly difficult.
It's literal rocket science.
And the early days of SpaceX reflect that brutal reality. The first 3 launches of the small Falcon 1 rocket completely failed.
And they didn't just fail quietly. They were catastrophic, highly public explosions. One was due to a corroded nut, another because of fuel slosh dynamics they hadn't perfectly modeled, and the third because of residual thrust in the engine during stage separation.
Painful to watch.
And this leads us to 2008. By his own admission, 2008 was the absolute worst year of his life. Everything he had built was imploding simultaneously.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see the true agonizing test of entrepreneurial resilience. It wasn't just that SpaceX had suffered 3 catastrophic failures and was completely out of money.
Right, there was more.
It was that Tesla, his electric car company, which we'll get into, was also bleeding cash, failing to deliver cars, and on the brink of bankruptcy. And all of this was happening against the macro backdrop of the 2008 global financial crisis.
Capital completely dried up. Banks were collapsing. Nobody was investing in highly speculative space and electric car startups. He was completely tapped out.
The accounts from that time revealed that he was personally out of money to the point where he was borrowing cash from friends just to pay his own rent and meet payroll to keep his companies alive.
He was taking whatever resources he had left and shuffling them back and forth between SpaceX and Tesla, trying to decide which child to let drown.
But he refused to let either die. It proves a vital point about his underlying motivation. He values the mission over personal wealth. He was willing to lose every single cent he had made from PayPal, willing to go completely bankrupt rather than let these visions fail.
The psychological toll must have been staggering. The media was practically writing his business obituary. Silicon Valley was whispering that he had finally flown too close to the sun. He was widely considered to be finished.
But the serial entrepreneur's relationship with failure is unique. They expect failure. They live on the razor's edge of probability.
That's a good way to put it.
When they fail, because anyone taking massive risks will inevitably fail, they don't get paralyzed by the shame of it. They have a phenomenal bounce-back factor. They look at the telemetry, fix the corroded nut, rewrite the separation software, and try again.
And bounce back he did, in an 11th hour salvation that sounds too dramatic even for a Hollywood script.
It really does.
Down to his absolute last dollars. Literally sweeping the couch cushions for funds, SpaceX successfully launches its 4th rocket, getting the Falcon 1 into orbit. And on the back of that single desperate success, they managed to secure a $1.6 billion contract from NASA to resupply the International Space Station.
That NASA contract saved SpaceX. It was the lifeline that validated all the suffering. And shortly after, investors stepped in to save Tesla. Disaster was averted by the narrowest of margins, literally mere days before bankruptcy.
And from that near-death experience, SpaceX goes on an absolute tear of historical, paradigm-shifting milestones. Fast forward to 2010, the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft becomes the first commercial vehicle to successfully launch, orbit, and be recovered.
And shortly after, it becomes the first private vehicle to dock with the ISS.
There is audio from mission control during that docking, and you can feel the crushing tension in the room. When that hatch opened and the astronauts floated into the Dragon capsule, Musk said it felt like every drop of adrenaline in his body released at once.
It was an intensely high-stakes moment where a single software glitch could have crashed their capsule into a multi-billion-dollar international space station.
But it worked, and the achievements just scaled up exponentially from there. Let's talk about the Falcon Heavy launch in February 2018.
The Falcon Heavy launch fundamentally shifted the paradigm of the modern space race. It was the Super Bowl of rocket launches. This wasn't just a slight iterative upgrade. It was a massive brute force leap in heavy lift capability.
To understand the sheer scale, the Falcon Heavy is the third largest rocket ever launched in human history, trailing only the Apollo Saturn V and the Soviet Energia. It has a payload capacity of 64 metric tons to low Earth orbit.
Which is massive.
To visualize that, it's the equivalent of lifting a fully loaded 737 airplane, complete with passengers, luggage, and jet fuel, and blasting it straight into deep space.
And the symbolism of the launch was profound. They launched it from Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, the exact same pad that sent the Apollo 11 crew to the moon.
Sending a message.
Exactly. It signaled a continuation of that grand era of exploration, but driven by a nimble private company rather than a sluggish government bureaucracy. And tucked inside that massive rocket was a plaque bearing the names of 6,000 SpaceX employees, a testament to the massive collective engineering effort required to pull it off.
But the real game changer, the true holy grail of spaceflight, isn't just getting heavy things into space. Governments have done that. The holy grail is getting the rockets back.
The development of rapidly reusable orbital rockets.
This is where the aerospace establishment thought he was truly, certifiably crazy. For decades, the economic model of spaceflight was to build a multi-million-dollar rocket, use it for a few minutes to push a satellite into orbit, and then let the boosters burn up in the atmosphere or crash to the bottom of the ocean.
Think about how insane that is. Imagine buying a ticket for a commercial flight from New York to London, and after you land at Heathrow, they just throw the Boeing 747 away and build a new one for the return trip.
A ticket would cost millions of dollars.
That's exactly how space travel operated. It was economically absurd.
So Musk decided, if we're ever going to build a city on Mars, the cost of access to space has to drop by a factor of 100. The rockets have to land themselves so they can be refueled and flown again.
And watching those initial booster landings, it looked like CGI.
It really did.
It looked like 1950s science fiction retrofuturism coming to life. You have this massive, smoking cylinder, 14 stories tall, plummeting from space at hypersonic speeds. It deploys grid fins to steer through the atmosphere, reignites its engines to slow down, a maneuver called a retropropulsion landing, and delicately touches down on an autonomous drone ship pitching in the middle of the ocean.
It's like trying to shoot a bullet and then shooting another bullet to hit the first bullet while blindfolded, trying to land a skyscraper on a postage stamp in the Atlantic Ocean.
It requires a level of software precision, fluid dynamics modeling, and mechanical engineering that is genuinely mind-boggling.
It completely upended the economics of space access. Suddenly, a private company is launching massive payloads for a fraction of what government space agencies and legacy contractors like ULA budget.
It makes you ask yourself, how do you handle high-stakes failure in your own life?
The bounce-back factor that took Musk from the brink of total ruin in 2008 to landing orbital rockets on drone ships is a masterclass in extreme resilience. It's proof that sometimes the biggest leaps forward come immediately after the most devastating, ego-crushing failures.
That mindset of relentless, physics-based problem-solving seamlessly transitions into the next massive battlefront. Because while he was literally fighting gravity with SpaceX, he was simultaneously trying to change the entire global automotive and energy landscape with Tesla.
Right, so remember that $165 million from PayPal. He took about $70 million of it and invested it into Tesla Motors in the early days, becoming the lead investor and eventually taking over as CEO.
Now, his mission here was very specific. Back in 2003, electric vehicles were viewed essentially as glorified golf carts.
They really were.
They were slow, they had terrible range, they were incredibly ugly, and they were perceived as compromised vehicles for people with an extreme environmental conscience.
Or, as he jokingly put it, people with an electricity fetish.
The legacy automakers out of Detroit and Germany had absolutely no interest in electric vehicles. Previous attempts, like GM's EV1, had failed or been actively killed off, largely because the giant auto companies were heavily invested in the internal combustion engine.
Their entire ecosystem relied on it.
Their entire supply chain, their dealership service models, everything relied on gasoline engines that required constant maintenance. So Musk, a software guy who admittedly knew nothing about global supply chain car manufacturing when he started, decides to take on an entrenched, century-old, heavily lobbied industry.
But his strategy was brilliant. He didn't start by trying to build a cheap electric car for the masses because batteries were simply too expensive. He started at the absolute top of the market.
The goal was to build the best sports car in the world, period, to kill the perception that EVs were weak and slow.
And the result was the Tesla Roadster.
And it wasn't just that the Roadster looked good, it fundamentally exploited the physics of electric motors. Unlike a naturally aspirated V8 gas engine that has to build up RPMs to reach its power band, an alternating current induction motor delivers maximum torque instantly at 0 RPM.
That's the key. That instant torque is why a completely silent, zero-emission sports car could pull up next to a screaming Ferrari or a Porsche at a stoplight and just absolutely smoke them off the line.
It wasn't just an environmental choice, it was a superior performance machine.
It completely shattered the existing paradigm. And that disruption wasn't just about speed. It was about how the vehicle was conceptualized from the ground up. Musk doesn't see a Tesla as a traditional car.
He sees it as a highly advanced computer on wheels, its software wrapped in a little bit of hardware.
Yes, the over-the-air updates. Traditional cars start depreciating and getting outdated the second you drive them off the lot. But with a Tesla, you could park your car in your garage at night, receive a software update over your Wi-Fi just like your smartphone does, and wake up to a car that literally has new features it didn't have the day before.
Better braking algorithms, longer range battery management, or entirely new features like being able to summon your car out of a tight parking spot using your phone.
Which leads us into the fascinating and often highly debated business strategy behind Tesla. When you look at the astronomical valuation of the company, it breaks traditional financial modeling.
It really does.
For a long time, looking at the revenue to market cap ratio, a massive, highly profitable traditional automaker like Honda was trading at around 0.5 times its revenue. Tesla, meanwhile, was trading at roughly 7.4 times its revenue, despite making a fraction of the cars.
Why is that? How does a company struggling through production hell, making fewer cars, and constantly battling supply chain issues have a wildly higher valuation than Ford or GM?
Financial analysts attribute it heavily to goodwill and what is essentially a visionary premium within the investment community.
Investors aren't just buying into the current quarter's sales figures, they are buying into Musk's track record of achieving the impossible. They believe he is fundamentally altering the future of transport and autonomy, and they are pricing the stock based on a massive, almost monopolistic future potential.
And he feeds that belief by continually making moves that defy traditional corporate logic. For instance, open sourcing Tesla's patents.
In 2014, Tesla essentially gave away the blueprints to their technology, promising not to initiate patent lawsuits against anyone who, in good faith, wanted to use their technology.
Counterintuitive, right? Why spend billions on R&D just to let your competitors copy your battery thermal management systems?
Because the goal wasn't just to be a profitable car company in a niche market. The stated goal, the mission that drives everything, is to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport globally. He realized that if Tesla was the only company making EVs, global warming wouldn't be solved.
The mission supersedes the immediate monopoly. He needed the big players to enter the game.
And as a result, the entire industry was dragged kicking and screaming into the future. There probably isn't a car company in the world today that hasn't dismantled a Tesla piece by piece to see how it works.
Major manufacturers like GM, Ford, and VW started committing billions to all-electric futures. He single-handedly forced a pivot in a trillion-dollar global industry.
But he also brought his own unique, highly eccentric personality into the product. And this is crucial for understanding the brand loyalty.
The Easter eggs. I love this. He hides these little Musk signatures in the software. The sound system volume goes up to 11, which is a direct, nerdy reference to the movie Spinal Tap.
A detail that a faceless legacy automaker committee would never approve.
Exactly. Or ludicrous mode and plaid mode, references to the sci-fi parody Spaceballs, which unlock warp speed acceleration via an Easter egg on the touchscreen. It makes the car inherently fun.
It creates a passionate, almost cult-like fan base because the product feels like it was designed by a human being with a distinct, irreverent sense of humor.
But the ambition obviously didn't stop at cars. If you fix the cars so they run on electricity, but that electricity is still being generated by burning coal at a distant power plant, you haven't really solved the carbon equation.
Enter Solar City and Tesla Energy. He pushed heavily into the solar market. And again, he wanted to change the aesthetics and the utility. Instead of big, ugly, bulky blue panels bolted onto your roof, they developed Solar Roof's glass tiles that look identical to high-end normal roofing materials but contain embedded solar cells.
And he paired that generation with local storage, the Tesla Powerwall. The significance of this pairing is massive. A family could generate power during the day, store the excess in a sleek battery mounted unobtrusively in their garage, and run their house off it at night.
In theory, you could essentially go completely off the grid.
Which is an existential threat to traditional utility companies. And his supreme confidence in this lithium-ion battery technology led to one of the most famous and slightly reckless bets in modern corporate history.
The Twitter bet in South Australia.
The region was suffering from massive rolling power outages due to an unstable grid and severe storms. An Australian tech billionaire challenged Musk on Twitter, asking if he was serious about fixing the grid with batteries.
Musk publicly bet that he could build the world's largest lithium-ion battery system in 100 days from contract signature, or the entire multi-million-dollar project will be completely free.
It was a billionaire's public wager on an international stage, and he won it. He delivered the project ahead of the deadline, and the immediate results were staggering.
The system, known as the Hornsdale Power Reserve, stored surplus electricity from nearby wind turbines and instantaneously fed it back into the grid during frequency drops. It essentially acted as a massive shock absorber for the grid, reducing the cost of frequency control services in the region by 90%.
At times, it was generating an estimated $1 million a day in surplus value.
But wait, to be fair, it wasn't universally praised. Critics, including traditional grid engineers and politicians, argued that a battery isn't baseload power, it only holds enough juice to power the state for a few minutes.
They called it a flashy, expensive Band-Aid that distracted from the need for fundamental infrastructure upgrades.
And that's a valid criticism. It doesn't solve the generation problem. It only solves the stabilization problem. But what it did brilliantly was prove that utility-scale batteries could respond to grid fluctuations in milliseconds, far faster than spinning up a natural gas peaker plant.
It forced the energy sector to take battery storage seriously.
Just incredible execution, even with the controversies. But while he is solving these massive, tangible, physical problems on Earth, cars, rockets, batteries, his mind is also fixated on a deeply theoretical, deeply existential threat.
This explores AI, Neuralink, and the simulation theory. This is the existential, almost sci-fi core of our deep dive.
And it is arguably the most complex and polarizing part of his worldview. While he's building machines that rely heavily on artificial intelligence, he has also issued very public, very stark warnings about it. He has stated that digital superintelligence is the most serious threat to the survival of the human race.
He goes so far as to call the unchecked development of AI summoning the demon.
Strong words.
He warns of a scenario, the singularity, where AI becomes auto-conscious, learns to write its own code recursively, and fundamentally surpasses human intelligence in an intelligence explosion.
The haunting question is, who will control the controllers? If an AI becomes infinitely smarter than us and views human biological needs as irrelevant or worse, as an inefficient hindrance to its own goals, we become completely obsolete.
It's important to present the counter-argument here, and we can look at Mark Zuckerberg's perspective as a perfect foil. Zuckerberg represents the classic, optimistic Silicon Valley view of technology.
He argues that AI is just a tool and it will unlock a tremendous amount of positive advancements. He points out that AI will help diagnose diseases faster than human doctors, it will cure illnesses by mapping proteins, it will make autonomous driving statistically safer than human driving, and it will optimize our resource distribution.
Zuckerberg views Musk's warnings as highly irresponsible, overly pessimistic fear-mongering that could result in regulations holding back necessary life-saving development.
Both sides have highly compelling arguments. The optimist sees a powerful tool that will cure humanity's ailments and usher in an age of abundance. The pessimist sees the creation of an apex predator that will view us the way we view house pets or ants.
And we aren't here to declare a winner in that debate, but rather to look at how Musk is acting on his specific fears.
This raises an important question. If Elon Musk is so terrified of artificial intelligence, if he truly believes it is the demon that will end human agency, why did he found and fund a company called Neuralink, which is actively developing brain-computer interfaces?
Isn't connecting the human brain directly to computers the exact plot of every dystopian sci-fi movie about AI taking over?
It seems like a massive, glaring contradiction at first glance, but the logic behind it is actually quite profound, if a bit terrifying. The philosophy is essentially, if you can't beat them, become superhuman.
Exactly. Neuralink is a direct engineering response to his existential AI fears. He believes that the fundamental limitation of humanity is the baud rate, the speed at which we can process and communicate information.
Right now, your brain might have a brilliant idea, but to get it into a computer, you have to slowly compress that idea into words and then type those words out with your thumbs on a tiny glass screen. It's incredibly inefficient.
And meanwhile, computers are communicating with each other at trillions of bits per second. He believes that if AI is inevitably going to vastly surpass our mental capabilities, our only chance of not being left behind as irrelevant biological baggage is to physically merge with the technology.
It's about creating a high bandwidth, direct cortical interface to use AI as an extension of our own cognition.
The initial applications for this BCI, or brain-computer interface, are purely medical and restorative. They involve implanting microscopic threads into the motor cortex to help people with severe spinal cord injuries or ALS regain function.
The goal is to let them control a computer, communicate, or eventually control a robotic exoskeleton purely with their thoughts.
Which is undeniably noble. But the long-term augmentative application is what's wild. It's about pushing past human biological limitations so that we can literally keep pace with superintelligent machines. Imagine being able to instantly access the sum of human knowledge just by thinking about it.
It's a radical transhumanist approach to survival, and it ties into another highly philosophical, almost metaphysical concept that Musk has popularized and debated extensively: the simulation theory.
This is where we get fully into Matrix territory. Musk has famously argued that it is highly probable, in fact he says the odds are billions to one, that we are all currently living inside a highly advanced 3D computer simulation created by a much higher, vastly more intelligent species.
It's easy to dismiss this as late-night dorm room philosophy, but he approaches the simulation hypothesis, which was originally formalized by philosopher Nick Bostrom from a purely statistical and computational perspective.
The logic goes like this. Look at video games. 40 years ago, we had two rectangles and a dot. Now we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously in virtual reality.
If you assume any rate of technological improvement, even a tiny fraction of a percent per year, eventually those video game simulations will become indistinguishable from physical reality. The characters inside the game won't know they are in a game.
And if an advanced civilization has the computing power to run not just one, but billions of these ancestor simulations simultaneously, then the statistical odds that we happen to be the one, original base reality civilization, and not one of the billions of simulated ones, are astronomically low.
It's an incredible thought experiment that breaks your brain a little bit. And what's fascinating is how this seemingly hyper-modern technological theory perfectly mirrors ancient philosophical and religious concepts.
The idea that this physical world is not the ultimate true reality, but an illusion or a lower level of existence, like Maya in Hinduism or Plato's caves, is a core tenet in human history. Musk is simply framing ancient philosophy through the lens of modern computing architecture.
But despite these cosmic reality-bending theories, and despite trying to merge the human brain with machines, Musk still has to navigate the messy, highly emotional reality of being a human being on Earth.
Which brings us to the final major area we need to explore: the human element. We've talked extensively about the machines, the rockets, the algorithms, but what about the man managing it all?
The material we have is quite revealing about the massive personal toll his ambitions take on himself and the people around him. We touched earlier on his relentless work ethic.
The standard expectation at his companies, particularly in the grueling startup phases, was working from 9 a.m. to midnight.
And he led by example, famously sleeping on the factory floor during Tesla's production crises, sending emails at 2 a.m., and fully expecting his engineering teams to keep pace.
And if you couldn't keep up, or if you told him something was impossible, you were often out the door. It was a high burnout environment.
But it wasn't just blind, irrational tyranny. There's a great story from a former PR employee named Julie that shows a surprisingly nuanced leadership style under extreme pressure.
She admits to making a massive PR mistake that ended up causing negative headlines on the front page of the New York Post. In the corporate world, that is usually an instantly fireable offense.
She describes being called into his office, and he is absolutely furious. But the phrase he used that stuck with her wasn't a personal attack, it was a philosophical point. Perception becomes reality.
Perception becomes reality, which is a powerful lesson in branding and public relations.
But the kicker to the story is that despite his intense anger, and despite the high stakes of the mistake, he didn't fire her. She noted that it indicated a level of understanding and grace underneath the intense, demanding exterior. He valued her past competence over her immediate failure.
However, that intensity undeniably bleeds into his personal life, often with tragic or highly chaotic results. The material touches on the deeply painful loss of his first son with his wife Justine, who tragically died of SIDS at just 10 weeks old.
An unimaginable tragedy that would break anyone. Following that loss, they immediately pursued IVF and eventually had 5 boys, twins, and triplets. But the relationship ultimately buckled under the immense strain of his 100-hour work weeks and his total consumption by his companies. It ended in a very public divorce.
And his romantic life post-divorce is described as highly complex and tempestuous. He began dating British actress Tallulah Riley. The timeline was incredibly fast. They married, got divorced, got married again to each other, announced a second divorce, canceled it, and then finally went through with it.
It was an emotional roller coaster. And then there was his high-profile relationship and subsequent painful breakup with actress Amber Heard, which was heavily scrutinized by the tabloids.
But what's truly revealing about his emotional state isn't the gossip. It's an anecdote from an in-depth interview he gave to Rolling Stone shortly after that breakup.
This is a remarkable, deeply human detail. Here is one of the richest, most powerful men on the planet, during a major profile interview with a journalist, openly weeping and asking the journalist if they knew anyone they could set him up with.
He openly, vulnerably admitted that he hates going to sleep alone, that he needs a companion to be happy.
For a billionaire of his stature to be so vulnerable, so openly desperate for connection in front of a reporter is incredibly rare. It exposes what observers call the big softy underneath.
He wears his heart on his sleeve, which makes him, despite all the billions and the rockets, weirdly relatable. He's this brilliant, once-in-a-generation engineer trying to solve the physics of the universe. But he hasn't quite figured out how to solve the basic human need for connection and emotional stability.
It perfectly highlights the paradox of his existence. He is hyper-rational when dealing with fluid dynamics or battery chemistry, but human emotions don't obey the laws of physics. However, whenever he encounters a physical frustration in the world, his default setting is to engineer a massive, almost absurd solution.
Which perfectly segues into our final fun detour that perfectly encapsulates his entire ethos. The Boring Company. It is peak Elon Musk.
This story goes: he's sitting in the back of his car in soul-crushing Los Angeles traffic, getting incredibly frustrated. Most of us just turn up the radio, complain about the commute, and accept it as a reality of modern life. What does he do?
He decides to buy a massive tunnel boring machine and start digging a 3D network of tunnels underneath the earth to bypass the traffic.
The Boring Company was literally born out of a tweet sent during a traffic jam. And the way he funded it initially was essentially a merchandising joke that turned into millions. He started selling branded baseball hats online.
Then, famously, he sold actual literal flamethrowers to the public.
Not a flamethrower, technically, to bypass shipping and customs regulations. But yes, he sold 20,000 of them and raised $10 million basically overnight.
It showed his immense cultural gravity. Whatever he touched turned to gold because of the sheer intrigue and meme culture surrounding him.
But the long-term vision for the Boring Company isn't a joke or a meme. It ties into his Hyperloop concept, a vacuum tube transport system that eliminates air resistance and mechanical friction, allowing passenger pods to travel at 500 to 700 miles per hour.
The ambition is traveling from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 30 minutes. It's about redefining the fundamental physics of terrestrial travel.
Now, we have to inject some friction here because transit experts and urban planners vehemently criticize this. They argue that building tunnels for individual cars is incredibly inefficient and suffers from induced demand. You build more roads, you just get more traffic.
They view the Hyperloop and the Boring Company as flashy tech bro distractions from funding actual high-capacity public rail transit.
And that tension is exactly what makes him so fascinating. He ignores the urban planners just like he ignored the legacy automakers and the aerospace establishment.
So what does this all mean? We have covered severe bullying in South Africa, ousted CEOs in Silicon Valley, orbital rockets landing on drone ships in the Atlantic, Easter eggs in electric cars, AI apocalypses, and literal flamethrowers.
If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, the overarching theme is that Musk operates strictly from an engineering mindset applied to the entirety of reality. He views every single aspect of existence as a puzzle waiting to be dissected and solved.
It doesn't matter if that puzzle is the thrust vector of a Falcon Heavy rocket, the lithium-ion chemistry of a grid-scale battery, the computational limits of the human brain, or a traffic jam on the 405 freeway.
He strips the problem down to its fundamental physical truths: completely ignores conventional wisdom, and builds a solution from scratch.
And that is the massive takeaway for you listening right now. You probably aren't building orbital rockets in your backyard, and you probably aren't trying to merge your brain with a supercomputer. But the core principle applies universally to whatever field you are in.
Strip your problems down to their absolute, undeniable truths.
Ignore the naysayers, the people who laughed and spat on his shoes in Russia, or the executives in Silicon Valley who thought putting banking on the internet was the worst idea of 1999. If the physics or the fundamental math of your specific problem says it's theoretically possible, then the only thing standing in the way is execution, relentless hard work, and your own risk tolerance.
It is a profound masterclass in not accepting the world as it is currently presented to you. It's about realizing that the rules of society were made up by people no smarter than you, and you can rewrite them.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly mind-bending thought to mull over. Think back to his belief that we are living in a computer simulation. We talked about the statistics and the philosophy of it. But take a step back and look at it purely psychologically.
This is a wild thought.
If you genuinely believed, deep in your bones, that this entire physical reality is just a highly advanced temporary video game, wouldn't that completely change your relationship with risk?
It changes everything.
If it's all just a simulation, maybe the only logical way to play is to set the game to the hardest difficulty setting possible, pursue the wildest possible objectives, and see what happens. Something to think about until our next deep dive. Thanks for listening.